All right. So I just wanted to get started to kind of set the scene with talking about your district, just a little bit. So I wanted to ask about the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District, and just if you guys want to tell us a little bit about your district and what you think makes it special.
Sure. I think this is my 21st year in the district. I think I think it's special enough that I did move my family here. So my students, my own children went through the district. They're now college graduated, but there's always been a small town feel, and there's always the issue that if there was ever a topic when you're a principal that parents needed to be involved, or there was an incident where you needed to speak to parents about something, they're always willing to come to the table, be on your side, sometimes not on your side, but at least be able to listen, and then at least know that you also might see them at the local food store, you might see them on the ball field, you might see them at the band concert. So there was always the respect that if there was an issue, we'd talk about it. Even if we're not on the same sides, we'd still do what's right for their kids and for the students. So I always liked that. I grew up in a city, and but I've come to think of Whitman and Hanson as a place where you try to do what's best for kids, and you try to have open communication. And I found so far that both sides always will listen, and then we'll decide what takes place from there.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, I would say what George said, it's the people for sure make it a very special place. Like George said, he lives in the community. We have a number of staff who live in the community. So they're not just, teachers and educators and administrators, but they actually are community members as well. And I think that makes it special because it says something about the space you want to contribute to it. George, Jeff, and I, so Jeff's the superintendent, George and I are both the assistant superintendents. We have all been in the, so George, the longest at 21 years. I've been here 17 years, and Jeff, I think 15 or 16. And then and the three of us have all worked together, George and Jeff, in their roles since 2018. I came up in 2022, but Jeff was the principal when I was a teacher in the high school. So we've all worked together and know each other, and I think that's really special and rare for administrators to stay in one place for so long. And I think it says something about the community and just the commitment to each other, to the students, and to the staff and citizens.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's really a community feel at the school and something that's kind of a bigger motivation that's driving the work that you're doing.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. And it's nice that you have that team built like that because it's true that, we see so much turnover often with at the administrative level. So I'm sure it's nice for you and for the teachers that they have people they feel like they can count on. So that's
I think
great.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about the win time program at your district because there's a lot of schools that might have some kind of win time program. Oftentimes it's just at the elementary school level. Some schools do implement it, maybe just in middle school or high school. But why did you see the need to implement that throughout your district?
I think that it's also talks about the strengths, I think, too, of the team that we have and some of the leadership that we have. So I spent my whole career in middle school. Nikki spent her career in high school special ed. Jeff, the superintendent, did both middle school principal and high school principal. So I think when we look at WIN, we knew it was in a post-COVID world, we knew it was something that we needed to do. We knew that there was ed tech that was out there in order to do it. And the natural inclination was, again, to start at the elementary school. We took some lumps, like you'll hear the word evolution, I'm sure, quite a few times. And as things evolved, we've changed them. But we always wanted to say, so how can we do this now at the next grade level? How can we do this at middle school? How can we then do this at high school, and what would it take? And I've always been a schedule guy, and the middle school principals now that are there are schedule people. Nikki knows how to do scheduling from all those years of special ed, so that it was just a natural outgrowth. What can we take from here and bring it to the middle school? What can we take now from the middle school and bring it to the high school? So it's sort of a natural evolution. And then it obviously looks different at the three levels based on the age and the needs of students. But I think it was just if it worked well here, why can't we? So instead of saying we can't, which sometimes happens in education because it's tough for change, we all sort of adopted the motto, and the principals were great about it too. But some resistance, but mostly great about it, is that why can't we? And then we went to the other levels.
Yeah, I think for George, Duff, and I, we are committed to what we put out in our strategic plan and in our vision. And our vision is very much focused on all students at each level. And so if we're driven by a vision, we should then make sure that we are actually implementing what it says. And so, like George laid out, it I wouldn't say it's easier at the elementary per se. It's just there's more examples, I guess I would say. And so there was more to kind of build on, and it insofar as it's easy, this is the only way I would say it is easy because it's changed for everybody. It takes commitment on our educators' parts, which they did. But just because the schedule in the sense of like having one teacher, kids aren't you know changing classes and things like that, that part makes it easier. But other than that, like, it's still the same amount of commitment for all the people involved, student, staff, whatever. But it was a place to start. But like George said, having middle school and high school backgrounds in the central office administration, we know that those kids need just as much as elementary kids need in terms of what I need. They have needs that, and as a special education, I was a special education administrator before I came to central office. And one of the things that I did or would look at is how many referrals for special education are we having? And we would find that we were having a large number of referrals and not finding students in need. Like they weren't actually requiring special education services, but clearly they had needs. And the people referring them were referring them because they felt like something was being missed, but we didn't have anything for that in between. It was either you're here and you're gen ed and you're struggling, or you must have a special education need then. And that's not the case either. So what's that in between? So we felt like kids at all ages deserve a in between, something else to help them, whether it's social, emotionally, behaviorally, or academically. And it doesn't always mean that there's a disability. It could just mean a snapshot in time is a struggle, and we just need a space for them. So I think that's why when we were building this, we knew we can build on from the like from the elementary to the middle to the high school, and look at what worked in elementary, bring that to middle school, what worked in middle school, bring that to high school. So and like George said, the other piece was knowing that one of the other commitments we had was elementary, it's more like regimented, and by high school we're working toward more flexibility.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really well put. That makes sense too. You're kind of leveling up with each grade level and maybe giving them a little more freedom as they
Yeah.
get older. Yeah, and
I
have to
agree.
figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what's so nice about this whole one time idea. Like you were saying, Nicole, it's what they need. So they might need really intensive services. They might need enrichment. They might need just a little extra help in something, but yeah.
Mm.
So it really helps build in that time. Yeah, thank you. So when you were implementing, were there some challenges that you faced during implementation that you could share that might help some other schools?
So I think I'll talk about the middle school a little bit, because this is our George can maybe chime in a little bit. The elementary has changed on the elementary, and tag into the middle school as well. But the middle school, this is our third year, and we always like third version. So every year, and I wouldn't say necessarily challenges so much as, ooh, that was something that we just learned from, or an opportunity, or and so in the first year when we brought it, it was about scheduling, and we brought it and we only were identifying students actually who needed intervention. And so then, and they were so we were overlaying it with related arts. And then the next year it was like, wait a minute, like with MTSS is also like focused very much on like, you don't remove students, it's not supplanting, it's supplementing, and that all kids, like to what you were just saying, Ashley, like it might be enrichment sometimes, and it might be intervention, but all kids benefit from having some opportunity for some what they need time. So the second year we changed it again, and we did, but this would be, and George and I talk about this, like this is probably the one, if anybody takes anything away, it would be like we called it win enrichment or win intervention. And I don't know that we necessarily publicly did that like with kids, but they picked up on it pretty quickly. And so it was like, oh, so in this year we started calling it win literacy, which is for everybody, or win math, which some students are in. But win literacy can be across the board, because you can be receiving enrichment in literacy, you can do literacy in all the content areas. So and we worked on looking at the state standards around literacy and making sure that they were being implemented, whether it was in an enrichment section or in an intervention section. So, just how savvy kids are on picking up, like, you're in win intervention versus enrichment, like, and that we needed to be more making sure that students were getting what, weren't getting that message, that there was something, wrong with being in a certain section or whatever. And then I would say the other piece about that was last year, and the change to this year again was the feedback. We got feedback from the students, and it was we scheduled them for 5 wins, 1 a day, and no, I'm sorry, there were still 4, but they were all win intervention or enrichment. There was no opportunity to like see teachers. So if a kid was absent, they didn't have time built in their day anymore to like go see a teacher or go over material. So we incorporated that back in. So now they get 3 either literacy or math opportunities, and 1 we call it Win Flex. That carries into the high school. That Win Flex is the same language we use in high school, which is when a student can go see a teacher for extra help, makeup, whatever it is, built in the day. So I would say like not so much challenges as just things that we learned along our way. That's what I mean. I don't know, George, what else would you say? Those were some that stand out to me.
I think we also tried, before we brought the teachers on board, before we even brought the building admins on board, we tried to say, okay, what are some of the things that we're going to hold fast with? And I think that was helpful. So like we held fast with, it's going to be 35 minutes a day. We held fast with, at the outset, we held fast with that we want this to be successful. We also held fast with that we didn't want to have teacher resentment at having to plan or prep for these pieces. So we spent a lot of time in having district interventionists. So our model at the elementary school is we have 2 district interventionists. One is reading or literacy, and one is math. And their job is really to, we have our SWAT team that goes in and does the dibbles and goes in and does the math fluency facts, and then they take their diagnostic. We use iReady, and then we make groups, but we try to have these people work with the interventionists at the building in order to design groups, in order to make thoughtful groups, and in order to curate win resources based on standards, groups of standards. So that when the groups were formed, we tried to keep it at the elementary school to only 3 standards, no more than 3 standards of students that you'd have in a group. And we did it at the whole grade level. And then it allowed for then teachers to be able to dive into it. It also, at the elementary school, an unanticipated bonus, which originally we thought might be a sticking point, was it wasn't just your students. It was students across the grade level. So if it's a 4th grade win, it's the 4th grade teachers, along with the interventionists, along with the paraprofessionals and the support people, all stopping at the same time. And what the teachers themselves, not a challenge, but a hesitation, we'll say at the beginning, was, no, I teach my students. I want to teach my students. But by the end, they really loved it, because what we saw were the added benefits of SEL, or whatever you want to call it. But kids made more connections and teachers made more connections. So as you went into the next school year, or as you're at an assembly, or you're at lunch duty or bus duty, you started to now, as a teacher and as students, integrate with and make more relationships with kids at your grade level that sometimes might be difficult at an elementary school. The junior high, the middle school and the high school had no problems with that because that's how their schedules run. But that was an unanticipated, what we thought was a hesitation, but really worked out better for the teachers themselves in the long run. So we provided upfront some decisions, we provided upfront support, and then we allowed everybody to be part of the process. And I think in doing that, it was able to create better buy-in. Not every level was the exact same with the amount of buy-in they wanted initially, but they all came around so that they have a vested interest in how it runs, what it looks like, and how we can support them.
Yeah, nice. It sounds like there was a lot of kind of front loading that you did with planning, but then
Yeah.
also throughout the process. Because my next question is a little bit about how you overcame some of the challenges, which I think was kind of weaved into your answers. But so it sounds like good communication throughout the process with the staff members, being careful about your wording with like what you were calling the win time, and then people seeing the benefits, which is something that we've seen so often. There's hesitation, and then people they jump in and they see how it works, and then that builds momentum. But is there anything else you want to add about how you overcame some challenges, Nicole or George?
Yeah, I would say at the middle school, Nikki kind of spearheaded it, but we reimagined the lead teacher role. And the lead teacher role was one at the middle school. So we have 2 middle schools, and we basically had 8 lead teachers: science, social studies, ELA, and math for each school. And those teachers would work with the curriculum directors. The curriculum directors go 6 to 12. But we wanted to say, and Nikki came up with a plan of how can we use that pool of money, that stipend pool of money, increase leadership opportunities for staff, and then help with this win process. So what we basically did was, instead of having 8 academic leaders, we went down to 4, 1 per subject, and then we went to grade level leads also, but with this like the same amount of money. So basically what that did was the principals liked that because they could have a 6th grade point person for 6th grade communication, 7th grade, 8th grade. And then the curriculum coordinators and staff liked it because we chose 2 basically lead teachers per discipline from each middle school, because we have 2 middle schools. So now we sort of bred this crosstown discipline English staff, social studies staff, science staff, of all the teachers at both schools. So it really did strengthen the curriculum, but these other lead teachers were also able to provide and help with the grade level. So WIN got strengthened, departments got strengthened and grew, and then principals still had their point person. And it was really just looking at a problem, looking at the pot of money we had. We talked to the union, they seemed on board with it, and then we were able to make it go from there. So these people curate resources at the middle school level. We also have a secondary data interventionist who helps with some of the data and planning some of the groups and working with the staff. But that early recognition, I think, and then how to do things differently and just think differently, sort of supported the work. And it's been a benefit that we weren't sure if it would work out, but it worked out as a benefit.
Yeah, I would say that the probably the best way we've I think been able to manage any obstacles that have arisen, or feedback, is just being flexible, realizing that just because we envisioned it being one way doesn't mean that that's the way it has to be. That if there's good feedback and good rationale for making a change, and so like to George's point about changing the way lead teachers had always been, just because it had always been that way doesn't mean it's serving us the best anymore. So I think that that's probably the other advice I would give to another school district looking at how do you implement a K to 12. Again, this for us was very systematic. it's 4 years, been 4 years at the elementary, 3 years at the middle school, and this is the first year at the high school. So we've taken time, we've looked at what's worked, what hasn't worked, we've thought about how it's going to build. We, like George said, laid out our non-negotiables, like one of them being we're doing this, that's a non-negotiable. But then the negotiables have always been, if it's not working, tell us why, and let's address that. Let's brainstorm, like, and when's the best time to make the change. So for example, it just didn't make sense to change to add the win flex last year, like when we were 2/3 of the way, and then we got the student survey information back, and it was like, well, we're not going to change this now, but like, let's do it for the start of the school year. And I went and talked to those 8th grade students, and I said, like, just so you know, your voice made a difference, and you're not going to feel the effects of it, but just know it will help your future students, but it will help you because it's helping to inform what we're going to do at the high school. So, and then there's some things that were like, oh, we need to change that tomorrow, like that just doesn't make sense to keep it going. So, but I think that would be the other piece around any way to overcome any kind of challenges, just to be open to the fact that there's going to be things that are going to come up that we didn't foresee, and to be open to making a change if it's in the best interest at the end of the day of the students. And that's the other thing, like, we'll have to do, we sometimes have to do, is like, there's a lot of stakeholders involved in these decisions, right? There's the admin, and there's the teachers, and there's the parents, and there's the students. And so sometimes when you're being presented with a particular challenge or obstacle, it's coming from one of those stakeholders. And so what we've had to also do is, like, what is our vision, and who is this is this what's best for the students? Like, I understand teacher X, like, you might not like this, and but what's the best at the end of the day for the students? So we've stayed grounded in that piece too, because it goes back to what George said, like, we've had to negotiate with our union, because there's a contract, and there are a certain amount of classes that, teachers can't teach more than certain amount of classes. So how do we utilize staff to curate materials so that teachers don't have to do extra work? Like, all of those pieces. But when we've stayed grounded in, oh, but is this best for students, all of our students, that helps inform, like, how we want to move forward.
Yeah, and I would say the only other thing I would add is, like, you have to, sometimes as like leaders, I mean, I always say this, like, you don't become a leader without some sense of ego, and we can say that's not true, but I think it is true. But when you take on something like this, you really have to make sure that you check your own ego, because sometimes you make a plan, you think it's a plan, you got a glossy brochure, you think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then a week into it, you're like, ooh, we have to change. So I think flexibility and evolution are what, if there's somebody out there who's looking to do this, it's like slow and steady. What are your non-negotiables? Please realize that the best plan you have is only the blueprint, and now we're going to go down that road, and there will be change. And I think if everybody knows that and comes at it with, we're not going to stop it, but how do we make it better? Then you have this evolution, because this has truly been an evolution at all 3 levels. And it's also what you touched upon before, students get choice as they move. So as a student ages, as a student gets a student voice, and as a student starts to take ownership of their own learning, at each level, they get a little bit more choice in what they need help with, how they need help. And then as Nick said, that win flex period is the opportunity to then maybe have a group or a club or something during that time, so that students who normally can't stay after school because they have siblings get off the bus, or they have to go to work or whatever, there's even a time built in where you can have that club or whatever at school. So it truly becomes inclusive, and it becomes equitable for all.
Yeah, you're not kind of making it only accessible to the kids that have the before or after school. Yeah.
Right.
Opportunities. Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. Yeah. That summed it up really well, I think. And I love it because it seems like a lot of these things you have learned because you've been flexible. So the things that you're sharing, you've learned along the way, but it kind of creates a blueprint that can help other schools. So it's very helpful. So if there's anything additional that you've kind of learned along the way about making win time successful, Are there any other things that you'd like to share about that?
I think the last piece of the evolution so far this year is that we're noticing that we're doing a really good job with identifying and helping our tier 1 and tier 2 students. But right now we get to the point where, again, time, right? This is called reimagining time. We get to the point where we have identified 4 students who are, let's say, in a first grade, and now the piece is how do we still help them? How do we still reimagine time or look at time in order to get them their tier 3 support? Because we're not ready to say they need special education. We're not ready to say we can't remediate this. So that's where the evolution of this is now taking us. It's like, here's that tip. We're at the tip. We know the pieces, but how do we still help them? At the middle school level, it's become, well, how do we then recognize burgeoning academic time? So how do we recognize, or the students that have a deficit in both reading and math, and as they get older, it becomes, more important and that much more high stakes. So at the middle school, we're trying to look at then a flex time daily, where it would be more of, here's a study, here's something you need to do to check in with teachers, here's what you can do for the academic work you're doing, and then the win time also. So it's like taking one period, breaking it in 2, still having it, but again, it allows those students who are on grade level or doing other things to have a time to have their check-in, to get their work done, to get their homework done, extra work, whatever. But it also then would allow those students who need a second intervention during the course of the day, so as not to miss another class or not to miss another opportunity. How do we fit that in? So that's what we're actively doing with our building principles and things now, in order to just, again, make it better for the students, make it better for everybody.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Anything to add, Nicole?
Yeah, no, I think we've covered it. Like it's really to make it successful is to be, we said flexible, but also to adjust, to take in the feedback, to take in both quantitative and qualitative data. Like, yes, there's a good amount of quantitative data that we now can have on students, which is fantastic, but also the qualitative, like what are people saying and feeling, like what's behind those numbers, and having those conversations, and then figuring out, again, if we're rooted in, well, what's best for our students, then what changes do we have to make? And that's what George is talking about too, because we also have a good number by middle school and high school of our students who have been identified and or are English learners, and they have another set of requirements and regulations around either an IEP or their ESL time. And when we talk about time and it's so fixed and you only have X amount of hours in the day, and MTSS is saying don't pull students out of X, Y, and Z, and it should be, again, like we said, supplemental, and students on IEPs are entitled and English learners are entitled. Like we're like, oh, like, but this is what we have. So again, it's just being like, okay, well, let's get some people at the table, because here's our problem, and let's brainstorm. How are we gonna solve this now obstacle or challenge that's been presented to us that we really feel like we need to address. So what's made it successful for us is, I think, commitment on the part of all the different stakeholders, from central office to the teachers to the admin to the students themselves, but also that we are willing to never just say, okay, we did that thing. It's been implemented. It's continually be evolving.
Yeah, this is nice. This kind of transitions into my PLC question, which is good because that's a continuous process too, right? Like you don't just say we have PLCs now. So
Right.
as a PLC district, you have this time, I'm assuming, where you and maybe the teachers in different grade levels get together to meet and collaborate. So can win time also provide some time for teachers to have those meetings?
We don't actually use it that way because our win time is run by our teachers. So we have PLCs for this year for the first time, K to 12. We've never had it at the high school. We used to have what are called early releases or late start days at the high school once a month. But we were able, with the new schedule that brought in win at the high school, to allow also, we have a 5-drop-3, and we were able to now have time for both certain grade levels and also at the high school department time. So for the first time, but at the K to 8, we've had PLCs for 20 years. since I got here. And it's a dedicated time once a week by grade level and then by related arts, at the middle school level or special ed, where they can be together. Again, and I think the sticking point, not the sticking point, but what you want to try to get to is you move away from telling stories and you want to try to get to, how do we talk about either instructional practices or things that affect students. So a lot of the PLC time has been as a result of WIN, and then we move that PLC into like a child study team or a stat team or a child requiring assistance, whatever you call it, so that we can really focus on one or two students specifically. But we always had the flexibility to have PLC meetings, talk about instruction, PLC meetings, talk about sometimes the routine of the day, if it's the end of the school year and you're having a field trip. And then also those PLCs that turn into those pretty intense child study team meetings that say, how do we really help these two kids, these three kids, so that we can try to not let anybody fall into cracks.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think because we had a really strong PLC model, K-8, it actually contributed also to the success of WIN because we already had a space built in to have data meetings and talk about intervention. So while they don't play off each other in terms of scheduling or anything like that, they do support each other in the sense of the PLC. So they are weekly, and a few times a year, those PLCs are dedicated to discussing WIN specifically. So I think having that space and that time already established has contributed positively to making sure that WIN is effective in the K-8, and that's how we get the feedback, or that's how, and it models for teachers how to talk about data, because I think that's the piece too, where in the times when we're not having a PLC that's specific to the WIN information or the diagnostics that we've done, or any academic or social emotional, when it's not specific to WIN but just talking about data in general, like curriculum data or things like that, we've it's a space to model how that happens, because I think one of the difficulties is it's not always easy to, you think you know what data means, or you think you know what that number means, and really actually having a thoughtful data discussion is a PD. It takes work. It's not always as clear. It's a number, but what does that number represent in the grand scheme of a lot of other factors and things like that? So I think that that's been helpful for people to have the space. To George's point, one of the things that came out, again, because we're constantly trying to like get feedback, is we do need to go back and make sure that our PLCs are running the way that we hope and intend, because it's easy. This work is hard. Being teachers is really difficult, and sometimes you come down and you do kind of start talking about, as we call it, storytelling, like, oh, what happened and whatever, and we want to make sure that this time is really helpful for practice. So making sure that we're structuring our PLCs the way we want them to be structured. Not that there isn't time, and that teachers don't need a time, at some point, but not during PLC time. Like if they're struggling with, something going on, okay, that might happen during lunch, but like during PLC time, we want that time to be structured and purposeful, because we only have a little bit of time, and to do it. They're probably like 40 minutes, and when we're doing that, because we're committed to it, it means, though, you're not in front of students. So if you're not in front of students, it means that we think this time is so valuable to inform the rest of the time when you're in front of students, that we want to make sure that it's structured, most effectively for everybody involved. So it's one of the places that we just want to go back and, just because we've had something and there's been, we just want to make sure that we're reiterating the expectation around what we want that time to look like for everybody involved. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's excellent advice. And it sounds like, because of the experience that you've had with the PLCs in that time period from K-8, that's 20 years is awesome that it's been that you've been running as having a PLC in that those grade levels. But it makes me think too that it's kind of helped build in the philosophy for something like win time. Like it's been training people to have in their minds how best to adjust and support students because of that. I think it's questions 3 and 4 in the PLC process, relate to how are we going to respond when kids don't
Right.
get what they're being taught, and then how do we respond when they do get it? Do we just say, well, now you're going to sit there for a while? So
Right. Yeah.
that's what I
When we
need, right?
when we first began this year, you're mentioning DeFore, we adopted the DeFore model, and then we went it from there, and then we've had to truthfully re-engage and go back to that to make sure that people still realize what this is. I mean, don't get me wrong. There was a time when I was a principal, if it was busy, and it might have been some storytelling, but then you always have to go back to, okay, what do we really need to do to inform instruction to help our students and to move forward? And so there are times we bring in outside consultants, we sit with a new principal, we describe that year-long part of the mentoring is part of PLC. Sometimes it's not the new principal who needs it. Sometimes it's a veteran principal who needs it. But we're constantly trying to say, how do we use this time? And one of the pieces now is do we have time during our PLC, and how do we make the time during our PLC to talk about instructional practices, not just students who need more help, but what are the instructional problem or the instructional practice of the day? And with the revamping of some of our teacher leaders and some of our grade level leaders, that has been the impetus for a principal to have someone at that grade level to sort of work on that agenda. And we've seen at some schools that they've really got to the place of they're really, they're really doing well with it and trying to take it to a higher level.
Yeah. So lots of refining along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So with win time as well, I know you mentioned MTSS a little bit. So I was wondering if you just had anything to add about how does win time support MTSS, would you say, at the district level?
I don't think you can have an effective MTSS model without having time built in. That's win time. Um, and again, because like in a response to intervention, a post with that was always reactive, and the MTSS, the whole idea, the whole philosophy is like we're going to be proactive. We're going to look and make sure that we're constantly apprised of how our students are doing. Okay, but when we see that they either need something enriching experience or they need some intervention experience, if you don't have an opportunity or a place to address that, then your MTSS model isn't going to be effective. Then you're just pulling kids out and it's response to intervention. Like it's not sort of then it is supplanting. So I think the idea around having win as a placeholder, but it's a place for all kids, because at any one point, some of our kids are experiencing they're on grade level, there's nothing in terms of SEL, they are then getting something enriched or deepened or having a discussion, but and then some of our other students are experiencing maybe a loss, like maybe a grandparent loss or something that's not going to be forever, but they need to be a part of a social emotional group for a certain amount of time, but they're not losing out on any of that tier 1 instruction, that classroom instruction, because we're not pulling them out for a special group. There's a time built in where kids that all get across the school or their grade are getting what they need. So there's no loss of tier 1 instruction, which is, at the heart of the MTSS model, that all students have access to all the grade level materials in their classroom. And then that it's, that we are, and that's our focus for next year, is re-looking at UDL and making sure that tier 1 is accessible to all students. But when, for whatever reasons, whether it's sort of an SEL need, a behavioral need, a academic need, or whatever it is, that there's a moment where students need a little bit more or a little more enrichment or whatever, we're making that space available and not denying some other opportunity because they got pulled out of art to be able to get this thing, or they got pulled out of the class to get this thing. Like that, we're not doing that. So I don't know how you would do MTSS without having a committed time. And then it's like what George just talked about. I'm going to lose my headphone. What do you do though when you have tier 3, which is only supposed to be about 5%? It shouldn't be a large amount of students, and it's not. And then, but what do you do now for that? And how to make sure again that we're not, pulling out, but there's only so many times we've allotted win. For the most part, that's where our students who need intervention get tier 2 needs met. What are we doing for this tier 3? So we're still trying to figure it out. I think MTSS on paper and in practice are different, but you couldn't even begin to, in my opinion, even be addressing what's laid out in Massachusetts frameworks. Every state has sort of their own blueprint or framework. You couldn't even begin to lay that out if you didn't have this dedicated time, whatever you want to call it. But I think win makes the most sense. So
I know, but there's so many different names. There's flex period, flex block. Sometimes they do like a mascot time. But I love win time because and there's different acronyms, I think, as well that people use, but it just sums up the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's super easy to remember. So,
Yeah, it is.
and what I think isn't helpful about MTSS and why I like is this idea that it's more asset based and proactive. And that's what I need is. It's like, oh, it's just what I need. There's no sort of deficit built into that. It's just like that can be anything, right? And so I think if there's a positive sort of proactive look on even calling it what I need. And then our high school, it goes for us, it's K to 12. You have a win block. And so it's sort of normalized now, I think, and it will just continue to be so as, because most of the kids now coming up will have already had it. So for a number of years. So yeah, I just thought we all thought that it just made the most sense to just continue the same.
It is also fascinating because when you talk to people about it who might not necessarily be involved in education to the level as all educators are, everything's an acronym. And when they ask what it is and you say, what I need, it's like this revelation that's like, oh, how can it be that easy? Why didn't I figure that out? But really, at the end of the day, it's the time when kids get what they feel that they need. So, I mean, it's simple. And, in being simple, sometimes that doesn't make its way into education, especially as an acronym for something, but it really is that simple. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great points. And I love that you talked about normalizing it. You're kind of taking away the stigma. I think maybe the worst name is when they call it like intervention block. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Lesson learned. Yes, you're right, Ashley. Like win intervention. Oops. I mean, even we called it win, but we didn't say that outwardly to the kids, but they picked up on it fast. I was like,
Yeah.
like it would be probably the teachers would be like, oh, are you doing a win intervention today? Like, is that what you're doing? And so they hear and they pick up because even though we'd call it just, oh, it's just win time. Kids know.
They're smart.
They are smart.
They have
Savvy.
good sensors.
Yeah.
So just kind of the last couple of questions are I wanted to talk about the benefits and just ask you, with this WIN program, what benefits have you seen so far? And this could be for staff, for students, or even for yourselves as district leaders.
I would say that if you look at we are seeing student growth. We are seeing students who might start the year a couple of grade levels behind, that they are making progress. We're also seeing students who still might be behind, but making progress at the pace that they're at. We're always trying to get them to make greater progress, but we are seeing that. And we're also seeing the fact that they don't have to leave an academic setting to miss what's at grade level to get reinforcement at lower grade level or whatever have you in the intervention space. I would say for staff, you have seen a rejuvenation in some staff and the ability at all three levels to see different students, to see even their own students, or to try something else. Like when you look at the high school schedule, the high school schedule has the ability to, if they want to have a win flex period or win options period, it has the ability to have yoga. If kids are in good standing, they can take yoga, once or twice a week with one of our staff. We have another one that does a running club when that takes place. So it's these little outlets that students get to make connections, that staff get to make connections. And again, it's just that evolution of the student themselves and that release of responsibility. If you're doing well, you're doing well. As a matter of fact, tonight we have a school committee meeting, and one of the things we're bringing up are now junior privileges. So seniors have privileges where if they're in good standing, they can leave instead of go to win if they have nothing and if a teacher doesn't assign them. So now at second semester, we're looking at, should juniors qualify for this? I mean, the ancillary part is we have smaller groups who need help who are getting it, but you see that there are pockets for everyone in order to meet with success. So it's been something too that brings the district together, because the high school physics teacher can talk about win just like the kindergarten teacher can talk about win. Different levels, but still the same process. So that there have been strides for everyone. There's been challenges too, don't get me wrong, but there have been successes in closing gaps and in also creating better relationships between students and staff.
I would say I think it shows that we are a district committed to students, that their needs are a priority, so much so that we have now a time dedicated K to 12 that is focused on what they need. Like that we feel so strongly about making sure our students are seen and heard and valued, that we have a dedicated time that sort of highlights that. I would say the other piece, um, that or one of the pieces George touched on, and I just think this is such a important one to point out in terms of the high school model. So one of our non-negotiables when we did high school was we wanted it at the end of the day. And part of the reason we wanted it at the end of the day is that if the seniors, and that the high school could determine what good standing meant, and it didn't have to be kids getting A's, B's, and C's, whatever. They got to determine that, like maybe some citizenship, and obviously not failing, because then you should be getting something you need if you're failing, right? But it didn't have to be all your A students, so they were going to define what good standing meant, but that if they were in good standing, they didn't need anything, what I need, because all their needs were currently then being met by whatever metrics they laid out, that they would be able to, with permissions from their parents, they could leave early, like they would have senior privileges. But one of the metrics they put in was that you couldn't be tardy. And we had a pretty um, significant tardy problem. And while it hasn't necessarily impacted the lower grades, yeah, that's been a positive for our senior tardy number has gone down, like noticeably. So because these kids they want to, you're going to be 5 minutes late or get to leave 40 minutes early, like come on, right? So that has been a positive, I think, in that way. And I just thought, in terms of if listeners out there are thinking about putting this in a high school, it worked
End
for
of the
us.
day. End of the day.
It would be another suggestion that I would that it was a benefit, that we weren't not thinking about, but didn't realize it would have the impact that it did. So yeah, I just think in terms of it shows the commitment overall to our community. Like our parents talk about it, it does come up like, oh, win is one of the things that I think, is a positive seen in the community. There's always, differences of opinion about whatever is happening, right? Curriculum, things like that. We know all that, but this has not been something that's been controversial or a negative in any way. So I think that that's been really helpful too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I love how it's supporting your vision that you shared at the beginning about your district and how it's a community and that students and what's best for them is number one. So you can see it tying all the way through everything that you've shared, really. So yeah, that's great. Great to hear that you're seeing those benefits. So my final question I just like to ask for anyone that comes on, and I know you've touched on some things already, so if you feel like you've already said it, that's fine. But if you have just one takeaway maybe for a school or a district leader who wants to reimagine how they use time in the school day, what would your one takeaway or one piece of advice be for them?
You need to embrace change, and you need to make sure that you're always seeking it, which sounds, weird in an education sense because education's so slowly changing. But when all you have is time, then you need to make sure that you have to look for pockets of time when you can make change and look for solutions for the problems that you have. sometimes it's easy to say that's a problem, we can't fix it. But if you go into it knowing that change will occur and you're looking to make change, you can usually find a solution within the context of the school day.
I think if I was to give anybody sort of the title of your podcast is perfect. Like you want to find the people that are passionate about reimagining time or reimagining what you can use. There's two things that are fixed, like your budget once it's set, so you know your allotment of money and you know your time of school day. But if you can reimagine how both of those are used, find those people who are passionate about thinking differently, about the way things have always been, and embrace that. And I think that's probably it goes back to your first question, like what makes us special in some ways, because I think George and I, that is one of the things that we both share, and why it's worked well for us to like take on these initiatives. It's like we don't sit on the fact that, oh, we've always did win this, I lead teachers this way, so it has to be. It's like, no, I actually know that we have this amount of money, and if we play with it, we could think differently. And I know if we have this amount of time, but if we think differently, and we had to restructure the high school schedule in order for it to work for PLCs and for win. And those were two, like we said, non-negotiables. Like whatever you want to do high school, but win has to be at the end of the day, and you have to figure out how to work in PLCs because we've never had that at the high school. And other than that, like give us some options. And so I think and people got creative because they were like, all right, it can't work the way it currently is. So I think that would be the piece that I would say is find the people who are, and it was like not everybody at the high school was wanting to do that, but the people that were like, all right, challenge accepted. Those are the people you want to get on board and work with you, because then it makes it fun and exciting, because you're like, oh, we have just re-envisioned. And again, we're going to go into next year, middle school, 4th year, and we're going to have another version because there's a couple things that we want to tweak again, so and we are tweaking some stuff at the elementary, and we'll probably end up doing a little bit at the high school as well. So that's what's fun, and that's what you have to look for. I would say is the people that want to say, yeah, this is the only thing fixed here is the amount. How we structure that allotment, that's game on.
That's a really good way of looking at that. And it sounds like a mindset shift for yourself, but then, like you said, finding the people that are willing to do that too. If you want it to be fun, at least, right?
Yeah.
You want it to work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, both of you.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us.